Streamline. Saying that is
Did you speak into the microphone yet?
Just saying, okay, so it's not on mute or anything, right?
no, why?
No, because someone is joining in from someone, Tina.
There is someone online. It's just, I don't know.
Okay. Oh, that's very good. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to our excellent lineup of speakers. My name is Sara Rabia. I am a climate, peace, and security specialist for the Alliance of Biodiversity and SEAT, CGIAR, based in Cairo, Egypt, and supporting the MENA regional hub of the Alliance. Welcome to the session of today. Our session focuses on nature-based solutions to drought and flood management in the MENA region. The MENA region is facing some of the most severe impacts of climate change, specifically when it comes to droughts, floods, and extreme heat waves, and also a myriad of other manifestations. In this context, nature-based solutions, or NBS as we call them, offer a powerful tool to help build resilience and address these interconnected challenges that the region as a whole faces. Today, we'll focus on how NBS integrated into policy, investment, and development can help vulnerable communities adapt to climate change and protect livelihoods. We're going to focus also on how NBS solutions can succeed, taking into consideration, for example, a human security approach, integrating, for example, tools of conflict sensitivity, peace and security, and adapting our solutions and our interventions to the context specificity of peace and security conditions in the region, to ensure that these solutions are not just environmental concerns, but also incorporating conditions of water scarcity, food scarcity, sociopolitical stability, challenges, and opportunities as well. Lastly, I would like to also shed light on the importance of incorporating people, prioritizing people, and this is also something that we're going to focus on in this session, and how we can create solutions that are both sustainable but also equitable to the local communities and to the people experiencing firsthand these conditions and the manifestations of the challenges that were just mentioned. So without further ado, I will hand over to our colleagues from Stephen Ferghese and Suzanne Gharaib from the International Water Management Institute, or EMI, for a presentation, and then we will open the panel for interventions. So over to you.
Thank you. And if you could pull up the presentation now. Be all set. And sorry, the clicker. Sorry, Debbie, do you know the clicker? Oh, it's this one, right. It's far more simple, which is a great thing. Right, okay. And now I have to get my timer on, and then we'll be ready to go. Okay, so hello, my name is Stephen Ferghese. I'm the Al Maruna project lead. And this is a project that is funded by UK International Development. It's led by EMI and delivered in partnership with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and then other organizations, including Sidari in Egypt, Palestinian Hydrology Group in the Occupied Palestinian Territories, Society for the Protection of Nature in Lebanon, and IUCN leads in Jordan. So I'm going to give a very, very brief overview about EMI, what EMI does in different places and where we work in the MENA region before going into the Al Maruna project and where we've gotten to in Al Maruna at this stage, and how we're how we're scaling deep Al Maruna. In other words, how we're expanding the focus within our pilot project areas. So EMI works in water management with a particular focus on agriculture water management. We work to drive action and propel change by mitigating water risks, overcoming global inequalities, and managing water sustainably. So we have a focus on water data science, gender, youth, and social inclusion, water governance, and looking increasingly in scaling finance and investment. We work globally. EMEA is one of this as a CG center, so from the CGIAR, and we work globally. And we work in collaboration with other CG centers like Alliance Bioversity as we're here today. So this just gives you a brief overview and the number of staff in different locations. So we have a big focus in Sub-Saharan Africa, East Asia, Southeast Asia, Southern Asia, and an increasing focus in the MENA region. In the MENA region, we have active or recent projects in Morocco, Tunisia, Sudan, Egypt, the occupied Palestinian territories, Jordan, and other countries. So no need to run off the entire list. The point is that working in areas where there are conflict zones, we are able to continue doing operations either remotely or in collaboration with the United Nations support. So this is an area that this is a theme that we'll touch on a little bit, working in areas where there are fragility, conflict, and migration contexts. Okay, so Al-Maruna is a project. It means flexibility in Arabic. The goal of this project is to increase water security in the MENA region through implementation of resilient nature-based water solutions in the face of climate change and land degradation. It's a mouthful of an acronym, resilient, or a phrase rather, resilient nature-based water solutions. What it means in practice is this: nature-based solutions for freshwater and agricultural water management in one go. The way that we're implementing resilient nature-based water solutions through our project Al-Maruna is through a community-led co-design process to tackle the specific problems in the communities where we're working in Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and the OPTs. We have a very strong focus on strengthening rural women's livelihoods, leadership capacities, and roles in natural resource management and agriculture. The only other point to note is that we're working through market systems, and we're attempting to link through market systems in our interventions more widely. We're addressing problems like salinity management, big issue for land degradation and desertification, as well as flash floods. So you see pictures from our pilot sites in Egypt and in Lebanon on the top. Then we have other interventions in other places around spring rehabilitation and sustainable agriculture management for livelihoods. So that's our pilot site in the West Bank, where we're working on spring rehabilitation and irrigation canal rehabilitation. In our project, we're taking a systems change approach. So some of you may have seen this specific visual before. It comes out of Donella Meadows' work, but it's looking at system change and where are the levers for system change. So our work in Al-Maruna strikes in each of these broad categories of system change levers. So around awareness and values and social norms, how institutions work with one another and the rule systems that they engage with, as well as very practical work on the ground. And that's mainly where I'll be focusing today, is that very practical work on the ground with some brief examples on the further end of the spectrum in terms of culture, values, and norms. And Dr. Sausen will continue with a lot more depth on that side as well later on. So now I'll go through our pilot projects in 3 of the countries. So I won't go to all 4, otherwise it starts to get long. In Egypt, we're working in Isbat al-Hamra, which is in Abu al-Matamir district in Bahira Governorate, so part of the Northern Nile Delta. Our pilot project has a major focus on agricultural production in Isbat al-Hamra, where that's a critical source of livelihoods, critical activity. And the area is particularly famous for artichoke cultivation and some other cash crops, and also strategic food security crops. So our pilot, the intention is to increase the productivity, as well as the sustainability and the equity in terms of being equitable of artichoke value chains. So we have a focus on water savings and soil treatment with a focus on salinity management. In terms of a sustainable management and operation, this relates to best agricultural practices for salinity management and operation of business chains. So thinking about the processing, and then the agricultural value chains connected with artichoke processing and beyond. In all of our pilots, there's a focus on empowerment of local communities. And again, I'll come back to this theme a little bit more, but one aspect in particular that we're emphasizing is that the pilots are embedded with local institutions. So in the case of Egypt, we're working to develop a water user association and working with the agricultural cooperative in that district. And that's the way that one of the ways that we're attempting to ensure the longevity and sustainability of the project is working through those local organizations with a connection to the national level. In Lebanon, we're working on flash flood management in particular, and in association groundwater recharge. So the series of pictures here kind of gives you the visual. You get flood management interventions, hybrid nature-based solutions, including gabions and natural structures in-stream natural structures. We will be working to develop a demonstration farm as well that applies best management practices and adopted crop varieties for climate change projections. We've developed an afforestation plan for the subcatchment where we're working. And again, this is working through local organizations. One, let's say, more general point that also it works across the board is we've undertaken high resolution and bias corrected climate change downscaling projections to help us target the specific crop varieties for that we anticipate to be suitable in the long term. Also for planning in the future, these high resolution and bias corrected projections will help us with, for example, flood management planning within that basin, the specific basin we're working on in Lebanon. And this is in the Ras Baalbek and Qa villages, which are in the Baalbek governorate of northeastern Lebanon. Continuing on to the occupied Palestinian territories, here's the landscape architect's rendering of the intervention after of the site after the works have been completed. So you saw the picture up there earlier where the spring source is, first of all, dry, and second of all, the area is not publicly accessible or publicly there aren't, let's say, amenity values except for the times when it's flowing. It's not a community space. So in the West Bank, in Wadi Farah, it's near Tubas, where we're working for rehabilitating the spring source and rehabilitating the irrigation canals. So in this spot in the West Bank, there are major challenges with the spring drying at certain points during the year. And they have the concurrent challenge of when there are flash floods, it brings untreated wastewater from a nearby refugee camp that mixes in with the irrigation canal water. And this leads to major problems for producers, for farmers in the downstream area. And so that irrigation canal rehabilitation will help to address both of those issues. The other point to emphasize is that from the spring, there will be a small reservoir, and that will support irrigation throughout the dry season. And we'll be developing a community space. So this is, again, the landscape architect's rendering of the community space with, excuse me, with opportunities for families to come together. And that connection with place has been a major aspect of our project in each of the countries, and in particular in Lebanon and in Wadi Farah. Very briefly on two of the wider aspects that we're thinking through. If we look at the awareness of nature-based solutions in the MENA region, what we come to is that there's very low knowledge of the phrase nature-based solutions, but as soon as you start talking about it, people understand what you're thinking about. So this is a terminology and language issue. When we've been looking, we've seen one good review of nature-based solutions in the MENA region that had a relatively large number of examples. And that review is from the middle of this year. So this is an issue that we're working to address in our project. And there's very little information on the costs of NBS implementation and impact evaluation of the benefits that is MENA specific, so specific to the MENA region. And these are themes that we intend to address. Because there's low awareness and low understanding of the norm and the phrase, that leads to risk for lack of agenda setting and lack of awareness. So you can't convince a ministry to fund implementation if they don't know the thing that they're trying to fund. So that's one of the major themes that we're working on. So to summarize, the way that we're working on the implementation of resilient nature-based water solutions in the MENA region is in a range of agroecological and socioeconomic environments within agricultural communities. So that's been our focus. These are in vulnerable, fragile, and conflict-affected areas. And we've, not through this project, but through a related project, we've started to work in contexts with, well, actually through this project, where there are refugee hosting communities. So that's integrated into our project, Al Maruna, as well as a related project in Jordan called Jehez, Ready. In terms of implementation approaches, we've taken a collaborative approach with community organizations involved in structured problem identification, let's say objective setting, and then structured options generation and decision-making around what to do and to address the problems and reach the objectives that they've set. And again, just to reiterate quickly, we're looking with market mechanisms and developing business cases for scaling. The broader work, which again, I haven't focused on, but feel free to reach out. We're working on awareness raising, capacity building at multiple levels, and also thinking through the policy and institutional implementation aspects. So with a very strong focus on national agencies' ability to interact and collaborate across the national and local levels. And we hope to build a robust evidence base across the socio-ecological spectrum and climate rationale for nature-based solutions in the MENA region. This is my handover point. So the very last part, before Dr. Sausen comes up, is that through our intervention development process and planning process and implementation ongoing and near future, women and youth have been at the fore, including working on gender social norms interventions to increase the adoption of climate change adaptation. Yep, so over to Dr. Sausen.
Thank you, Stephen. That was excellent. So I wanted to go back to the point of Al Far'a camp and the design site. The design is very gender responsive. So we looked at the needs of the women, the children, women heads of households. I mean, we tried to design it to be responsive, even to women who are engaged in market products. So there are kiosks for them to use, and they can rent out and they can rotate. So in terms of gender responsiveness, it is there in Al Maruna. But then we had the chance to look deeper into the more of the gender and social norms underlying our work in our NBWS. So we started last summer with a capacity building, along with a great organization that focuses on gender and social norms. And through that training, we did a number of identification. We looked at the hidden barriers, the issues that prevent women and youth from actually engaging, not related to structural issues, not related to transportation, not related to costs, but looking at time use and looking at a number of unwritten, undocumented barriers. So we identified a number of negative or negative social norms and gender norms as a subset of social norms. And there were practices that prevented women and youth from accessing in general, activities related to nature-based solutions. But at the heart of it was economic violence related to the control of assets by the youth, by the women, and decision-making within the household. So as these were identified, we decided to do a deep analysis of the root causes, and this was across the 4 pilot areas. We looked at the individual, Then we looked at the household, and this is the novelty of this additional work. We looked at the power structure within the household between men and women, the youth, the children, and so on. Identified the entry points, identified the issues, and then designed entry points, but also moved to the another level, which is the community, the municipalities, the community, the local structures around schools, health centers, and so on, even small businesses. And finally, the enabling environment linking up to Al-Muruna in general. As a result, we've designed a theory of change that actually complements and links with the Al-Muruna theory of change as well. So what we found is that we have inequitable gender norms and practices that prohibit women from full participation in economic and natural resource management activities. And this affects or limits the uptake of climate change adaptation, innovation, and this is both physical and social. That's the problem we've identified. So they are critical to sustainability of our activities. The intervention being designed is on 3 levels. The first level is individual capacity for women and men in terms of training on agricultural best practices, on nature-based solutions, smart agribusiness. Our target is 1,200 men and women. And here we have a number of asset transfers from simple tools to technology, seeds, fertilizers, etc. Then, or vaccination as well, if it's livestock. Then we are building a gender equitable attitudes manual within the household. These are sessions for the couples. They attend over 22 weeks. They learn jointly to communicate, to build financial plans together, budget together, prioritize, and create safe spaces where communication is the basis for prioritization. And here we are targeting 1,200 women and 1,200 men across the pilots. Then we move on to the community level, also greater gender equitable water management systems. Here we are working with water management associations, cooperatives, agricultural associations, and also loan revolving funds, Islamic financing for the households. I think that this basically concludes the innovative Al-Muruna Plus. I want to conclude with no water, no farmers, no food. بدون ماء لا مزارعون ولا طعام. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you so much, Dr. Sultan. Thank you also for shedding light on the issue of financing and its very, very context-specific dynamics, especially in the region, especially when the region has suffered through a lot of challenges that may have altered the priorities, may have altered our focus areas. But it's very important that we talk about sustainable financing in the region, about how to make it context specific, how to make it suitable for the needs of the communities on the ground. We were just discussing in a previous event, and this is, it's great to create synergies between discussions as such that, and I think Bradley also from your lens, you would be able to shed light on this, on the issue of sustainable financing that is context specific, and how in the region we need to take into consideration gender components, how women perceive, how can we enable women, or enforce a gender lens in the products, the finance products that we produce in the region. What does it mean for refugees, and how can we incorporate refugees and their needs and priorities? So I want to hand over to you, Bradley. Bradley is the lead on climate change and sustainability for the Islamic Development Bank. And Bradley, you are based here in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, if I'm not.
Yes, just a few hundred kilometers
Yes,
away,
just yes. So around the corner here in Jeddah. So Bradley, over to you to walk us through how you perceive, from the ISDB's point of view, how you perceive this issue. How can you support, from your lens, nature-based solutions and their dissemination in the region? Over
Yeah,
to you.
thank you so much for having me here, and congratulations on the presentation. This is excellent work. So great to see, and happy to follow up afterwards and see how we can collaborate. So my name is Bradley. I'm from Islamic Development Bank. For those who are less familiar, we're a South-South development bank. We support 57 member countries and Muslim communities around the world. And one thing I always like to say, people think bank, just money, and that's obviously lending is a big part of our work. But also we do knowledge generation and exchange. We do capacity building, technical assistance, policy support, and then obviously investing in people, and then assets and infrastructure. I wanted to divide my response into sort of three sections. One, what we've done at this COP. Two, how we're integrating nature. And then three, a little bit more on financing. So I'll just run through that. So at this COP, sort of at the interface of drought and flooding, we've sort of been a foundational supporter of the Riyadh Global Drought Resilience Partnership, which was announced, I think, on the 2nd or 3rd of December. And Islamic Development Bank committed to have $1 billion of its pipeline of projects aligned to drought resilience support. So I think that's a good start. We also were part of a joint Arab coordination group pledge again, but more broadly with the UNCCD aligned financing. So that covers drought, land degradation, and also desertification management. And then one of the other things that happened on the 3rd was a One Water Summit was held in parallel to the COP. And the Islamic Development Bank president announced a joint MDB, Multilateral Development Bank statement on water. So basically where the MDBs are coming together to try to do more in the water space, basically. So it's been an active COP for us, particularly as Saudi Arabia is our host country. The other thing that we've been doing, which again cuts across what we're talking about today, is we introduced came up with the term, but sort of exploring the concept of just land transition. So we wrote a paper with the UNCCD earlier this year, a T20, G20 paper. And the idea is, you've probably heard about just energy transition. So everybody talks about this. How do we go from coal to renewables? But when you think about the number of people in the land sector compared to the energy sector, it's much larger and it's a more complex transition. And this relates to food security, water security, land tenure, gender, and many issues. So that's something that we're exploring and we want to take forward after this COP. So again, happy to talk to colleagues about this. Coming to nature specifically, I think one of the colleagues mentioned, the business model around nature has been a little bit tricky traditionally, particularly for us who work in the sovereign side. So do we get requests from governments to borrow for nature-related activities? And historically, that's been quite low, but hopefully that can improve in the future. So what are we doing to try to improve that? First, we're doing some work with the other multilateral development banks on defining what is nature finance, right? And so what we're coming up with at the moment is that there's two elements to it. One is nature positive finance, and the other one is we're calling nature mainstreaming finance. So nature positive would be something that has a tangible and measurable impact on an ecosystem at scale. So that might be less common in our lending, but nature mainstreaming could, for example, be a wastewater treatment plant investment, which reduces pollution into a water body, which is obviously a contribution, but may not necessarily turn that river into a pristine ecosystem. I'll skip through some other stuff. What we're trying to do internally at the Islamic Development Bank is to create a blueprint for green finance. Now, underneath green finance as a general term, you may have climate finance, which is quite well established. You may have nature finance, which I just referred to. But off this COP, there may also be a call for UNCCD aligned finance, the third of the COPs. So that's something that we're looking at. And I'll finish up, but we are looking at different financing modalities. For example, we have green and sustainability sukuk, which are the equivalent of bonds. So you can crowd in private finance for green activities. We're also, with UNDP, we've been working on something called takaful, which is Islamic insurance to help protect smallholders and pastoralists from climate-related and other shocks. So this is important. And the Global Takaful Alliance, which was announced here, aims to reach 100 million people by 2030. So these are things that are ambitious. Hopefully we can meet these targets. And then the last one, I think just because the colleague mentioned it in his presentation, We do have increasingly regional agri-food commodity programs, and for example, on cassava in West Africa. And so these are programs which have an umbrella component, but which are engaged in by each country. And what we're trying to do is integrate things such as soil fertility mapping and other components, which can then say what to plant where, and then perhaps where not to plant at all, you know, for ecosystem purposes. So I can go on with other examples, but I'll stop there for now and look forward to hearing other people's responses as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Bradley, and thank you for touching up on the great work done by the Islamic Development Bank. And the issue of takaful and the projects related to takaful is also something very interesting. A lot of the work that we've done, for example, as the Alliance and as CGIAR on climate financing or climate resilient financing in the region, specifically with Syrians and Jordan, we came across a lot of refugees who refused, for example, to deal with banks because of the issue of interest and because of religious requirements that forbade them from dealing with interest. So they would rather do informal lending and informal borrowing on the social level instead of having to deal with banks to avoid the issue of interest, because it's religiously restricted. So banks, I think it's very important for banks to be on board in this conversation and to understand that there are other, you know, like murabaha or like other dynamics or other formats of financial support that we could provide for individuals, for farmers on the local level that could enable them to improve their livelihoods and enable them to build a more resilient system of livelihood. So thank you, Bradley. I want to move on to Engineer Amira Musa. Engineer Amira Musa is the lead of climate change, the climate change profile, I think, of the British Embassy in Cairo. I want to ask you overall to take us through your profile, what you do, and your take on this. But I also would like to invite you perhaps to focus on the policy level. So I think the British government overall, or even the British Embassy in Cairo, has done a lot of advocacy, a lot of policy support in that space, whether in Egypt or whether through the COPs. The last COP, we've seen a lot of engagements of the British pavilion or the British negotiators in this space. So over to you to walk us through it. And what do you think are the priorities to look ahead when it comes to international cooperation in the region on nature-based solutions? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's great to be here today. Good afternoon, مساء الخير to everyone. So to answer your question, my role is, as you mentioned, I'm the climate change advisor at Post in the British Embassy in Cairo, working for the Foreign Development Office. It's basically involves the UK-Egypt Green Partnership. So all the projects where the UK and Egypt work together on climate change, either mitigation or adaptation. And that's obviously cross-cutting with food security, water security, and energy, agriculture, and all things in between. For our discussion today, perhaps I would start with the basics, maybe, where we all of us, I think, acknowledge that water security is fundamental to sustainable livelihoods, human well-being, and socio-economic development. And so that requires safeguarding sustainable access to adequate and acceptable water, while also protecting against water-related risks. So from the UK perspective, climate is one of the priorities that the UK government has on its agenda. So, for example, our Foreign Secretary was there at COP also with the Prime Minister. We announced that domestically, for example, we're going to make 81% reduction in the UK's carbon emissions based on or with respect to the 1990 carbon emissions. And also one of the core missions for the UK government is having a livable planet for all. So with that being said, it's very important to us to work with our development partners, but also with countries who are affected by climate change on water security issues, and basically the nexus between water, food, and energy. Obviously, nature-based solutions offer a path forward addressing key water challenges, delivering also co-benefits, as I mentioned, as health, livelihoods, biodiversity, and climate resilience. And also, of course, mitigating and adapting to climate change. So as maybe Stephen has mentioned also, the evidence around nature-based solutions and to which extent they are useful, beneficial, and also how they compare to gray or the common infrastructure used up to date is kind of very limited. And usually as a UK, what we'd like to do is investing in evidence-based projects, research, and so on. So given this gap of knowledge that's related to nature-based solutions, that's one of the reasons why, for example, we funded El Muruna across the MENA region so that we build evidence around that. And I think so far with EMI and CGIAR, and of course, speaking of Egypt and the Ministry of Agriculture and Dr. Muhammad, we've been lucky to have this project working really well in the region and specifically also in Egypt. And maybe the way forward that as maybe Bradley from the Islamic Development Bank mentioned, it's about financing also this kind of solutions, because again, if there's no enough data, it makes it hard for everyone to work on this intervention, either banks, delivery partners, like everyone. So we need data to be able to scale up this kind of solutions. And up to date, as far as seen from the statistics, there's only 1% of water resource management funding supports nature-based solutions. And I think if we need to realize the potential of this approach, we must really scale up this figure. I'm not sure if that answers your question. And if you have a follow-up one, I'm happy to.
Hello. Yes, thank you so much. That does answer the question. And I think we could go on for a very long time about the United Kingdom has been doing in this regard. And I think ever since even Glasgow, COP26, we've seen a lot of commitments, a lot of political leverage that the British government as the host of the COP26 has given to this profile. But we will go we will go around for another round of questions. But I do want now, and thank you so much, Engineer Amira, I do want now to go to our last but not least speaker, Dr. Muhammad. Dr. Muhammad is the chief researcher and the director of the Technical Office of Soils, Water and Environmental Research Institute and Agricultural Research Center of Egypt. Dr. Muhammad, your profile is very big, and I think nature-based solutions is only a small part of it. I want you to maybe focus on, as an umbrella organization that kind of houses different projects, different stakeholders, whether it be international, whether it be MDBs, international organizations, member states who are working in that space. How do you, first of all, prioritize nature-based solutions within all of these different profiles? And also maybe tell us more about how the government has approached this issue to prioritize it, to streamline it across different projects. And what do you think are the priorities for the year ahead or for the period of time ahead as we launch new projects in that space? Over to you.
Good afternoon, everybody. In the beginning, I need to come back to your comment before for the Islamic Bank. really we suffering from to how to let the farmer accept the loan from bank, because they usually working with agricultural production, and this is not easy process. He's suffering from a lot of things, maybe shortage of water, maybe shortage of nutrients for in the soil, and the productivity is really depend on the availability of water. So he can to accept how we can pay for interest in this regard if he lost his production, or making anything is not in his hand. I mean, so it need to look about the interest for the loan for the bank. I completely agree with you. And the first point for the government, nowadays we're thinking about how we can integrate the cooperation between the government, international organization, private sector, farmers, and as well the community itself, and how the social accept this interaction and integration is very important, because we cannot moving forward alone as a government. I mean, we need to support from British embassy, for example, Netherlands embassy we already working with, and a lot of embassies in Egypt. So it's very important to cooperate. And the private sector is very important as well, because he's supporting our activity in the field. Is the depend, because the farmers need to more to help, especially in Egypt. We have a problem because we have a lot of smallholders farmers. Less than they have less than one fedden, and this is very important, and she cannot accept to do high technology impacts. So we're looking nowadays with, for example, with Canadian embassy, is how it's using the smart agriculture practices and how to apply this. One of this is nature-based solution. The main problem with applying the nature-based solution, not its nature-based solution itself, but it's awareness for the farmers how can use the nature-based solution. And he should be seeing a biology area, seeing a demonstration field to accept the idea for using nature-based solution. The second point, nature-based solution, it takes a little bit more than timing in applying. And the result will be pronouncing after maybe 2 or 3 years. Not directly, he will face or gain his benefits. It needs time to do that. So we need to increase awareness, to increase the looking for a demonstration field and so on. For example, in Egypt, for عزبة الحمراء أبو المطامير district, we're suffering from the salinity built up. It's related to not only the water shortage, but is close to the sea. So we have sea level intrusion. So we're suffering from water shortage, and salinity come from the sea level intrusion. So we need to adapt with the salinity and give him a good recommendation for this by the two way. Where first one is how he's saving water by improving surface irrigation, or improving water irrigation and increasing the water efficiency in this area, as well as treatment the soil salinity. I hope that I give you my answer about this, but I still hope and looking be in the government looking for increasing the cooperation, as I mentioned before. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Allow me, based on, thank you so much for mentioning the issue of awareness raising and mentioning the issue of capacity building, because we might have the data, we might know what the problem is, but then communicating the problem or communicating the solutions to the farmers on the ground, to the people who really need to adopt the solutions, is kind of a challenge that we need to work on collaboratively. But this takes me back to Emi, who's done a lot of excellent research on the topic. You know the issues, and you've researched very thoroughly through Muruna or even Jahez and all the projects that you've shed light on. We've researched the issue of nature-based solutions, farmers, how can we push forward for nature-based solutions? What does it mean financially that we adopt nature-based solutions, and what does it mean to finance such projects or such solutions? But the issue is as well, how can we communicate this to farmers? How can we address the capacity gaps the capacity needs, and also the knowledge gaps. How can we communicate the data? Just recently, we had a comment from Kenyan farmers who showed up to the CGIAR pavilion, actually, and they had a comment to say about the work of CGIAR, and allow me to share this now. As CGIAR organizations, they said that the research you do is great, the knowledge you produce is great, but then it doesn't reach us. And they said this in a very, constructively critical way. They said, you do a lot of great research on Kenya. We've done extensive research on nature-based solutions in Kenya, climate smart agriculture, etc. But then it doesn't reach the farmers. So going or using Dr. Muhammad's intervention as a segue, how do you think this is can be addressed? Over to you.
There we go. No? Oh, whoa. Okay, sorry. Right, woke everybody up. Yeah, thanks. It's a really good question, and it's something that we've dealt with a lot. So there's a couple layers of answers, but I'll keep it brief. So CGIAR, so EME does applied research for development. As a CGIAR center, we do applied research for development. Sometimes that applied bit and that development bit and the research bit are a little bit in tension with one another, and sometimes with the individuals who are involved in it and their own, their own proclivities, right? With Al-Maruna, what we've really tried to focus on at every step of the way is, first of all, working with communities, working with national stakeholders, like Dr. Muhammad as our focal point, but a wider constellation of national actors, and with local community organizations. So one of the first things that we did in Al-Maruna was we took a human-centered design approach to the various people who we thought would want to apply resilient nature-based water solutions. We came up with a list of about 50 plus or minus, let's say, types of individuals. So a smallholder farmer who owns the land and has surface water, a smallholder farmer who has groundwater, a credit officer at a bank, a refugee camp, someone who's in charge of operations at a refugee camp, a water ministry planning official, et cetera. Okay, so the list goes on, right? The point is that when we came up with 6 at the end, because we needed a finite number that we could work with, so we have individual smallholder farmers and two groups there, 2 types there. We have community-based organization leader, we have local government official, and we have 2 different types of national government officials. Okay, so this is the first thing. We have to actually think through who we are working with and for. And the answer is we're working at each of those levels. So this is the first part of that. In terms of the communication itself, in nature-based solutions, if you go to look for the amount of content in Arabic, even Google will not provide you much, okay? And remarkably little. Approximately, the first time I looked on YouTube, okay, not Google, but on YouTube, I found 2 references, okay, in Arabic language searches. And if you look in academic or gray literature, it's not that many more. So the point is this: it has to be in the local language first and foremost. Second of all, what's in a technical report and what works with each of those 6 priority stakeholders is very, very different, right? So the way that I'm talking here is not the way that I would talk with a local community-based organization leader. So yeah, knowing your audience, and speaking the audience's languages is the long and the short of it. And I'll stop there.
I need to add something.
Yes.
That we last few years, maybe last 2 or 3 years ago, I noted that during my institute we working with different organizations, but I found by the end of any project we are suffering from 2 points. First one is sustainability, how it will be sustainable, and the second one, we working as a separate part. We need to integrate. Maybe we deal here with the British Embassy, and they funding our activity for Egypt, for example. But by for the Bahira, And maybe we have another project is related or similar, or maybe in another location. So we need to thinking about how we make, for example, platform to add all information from all organization. FAO, for example, CGIAR, for example, EME, CARDA, and so on, all and working in the same country, and put it all information together to cooperate and to looking for how we can sustainable this project.
Thank you so much. Yes, over to you again.
Yeah, okay. This will be quick because I got so carried away with my first part that I forgot the second. So one of the other things that we did in the Al Maruna project was to develop a structured capability and capacity framework for the implementation of resilient nature-based water solutions. And that was, the part of that was a human-centered design process that I described before. So we looked at the sets of capacities and skill sets that are required by those different groups of people for the implementation of resilient nature-based water solutions. And it was much broader, actually, than many of our colleagues, national and local stakeholders would have thought. So we came up with about 17 high-level sets of capabilities and capacities, and many sitting underneath them. And there were some surprises for some of our stakeholders there. So, for example, communication and facilitation and community engagement skills, that's kind of all wrapped up into one. And even that's a broad theme right there. And we've gotten additional requests from the local government agencies where we've been working to increase training, not on hydrology, not on engineering, not on, climate change modeling, but communication, facilitation, and community engagement, which to me is telling, it requires a different constellation of skill sets and their application that is quite different than other types of development approaches.
Thank you so much. So a multi-layered approach to capacity building, perhaps, better cooperation, as Dr. Muhammad was mentioning, better interconnectedness of interventions and on-ground communication, on-ground coordination between the different stakeholders. This is all very interesting, and I think maybe we can now perhaps open the floor if you have any comments to our panelists. I don't want to be the only one asking the questions, although I do have many, many questions. Would you like to maybe share some points of your own experience or your own lens, or any questions to our speakers?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Kagema, so I work for CGIAR. I'm leading the Impact Area Platform on Environmental Health and Biodiversity. It's not really a question, it's a comment, but any feedback I can get from you would be very useful, and mainly focusing on the bank, the government side, and I had something of UK, probably kind of a donor side. So nature-based solution, I think, is what we need for the future if we want really sustainable systems. At CGIAR, we talk about sustainably transforming food, land, and water systems. But starting with financial institutions, the return on investment, I'm not a specialist on nature-based solution for sure, but I believe in terms of the return on investment, in the short term, it could be challenging. If you use it today, getting the money tomorrow and start paying the loan may not be an easy thing. How the financing institutions can rethink the financing models in terms of really facilitating, especially smallholder farmers, to uptake nature-based solutions. Now going to government. The government, we know really, you support a lot of farmers. That one, I'm not going to argue about it. But we also recognize that majority of the smallholder farmers are resource constrained, especially when you talk about finance. And they can tell us the good we want to hear as a financial institution, but as long as they don't see the return on money, on the investment, they will be reluctant, but they may not say it loudly. as governments, what can you think about potential alternative ways of supporting smallholder farmers adopt nature-based solutions? In government, I used to work for a government, but that is a couple of years ago. You also need a bit of support in terms of investment. Now talking about the donor communities or kind of cooperation options, what cooperation can help us to do in terms of really accelerating the adoption of nature-based solutions? We need it, but the pace is relatively slow. What can we do to make a difference? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much for the questions. Quite a lot of questions. But maybe I'll start with you, Bradley, since it's always the investments and it's always, I think the conversation, one of the most important pillars of any conversation is how do we finance everything we're talking about? And one of the things that you rightly mentioned was the issue of return on investment and basically the issue of requesting of the farmers after taking up a loan to adopt, for example, a specific solution, or after engaging with these farmers on a certain finance product, how or when can we start asking them to pay up? Basically, one of the main findings that we've found also during our research in Jordan, and I do agree with you on this point, is that one of the main outcomes that the Syrian refugees in Jordan have indicated, one of the main solutions that they suggested was a grace period by the banks for them to give them a chance to start cultivating, to start building the product, start building whatever project they're working on, start making money, and then based on the profit that they're making, they can start paying back the loans. So like the issue of a grace period before we request basically the farmers to pay up on whatever loan that they're taking, and also how can we better finance the projects or the solutions, especially the nature-based solutions that we're discussing. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. And these are difficult answers, but this is why we're here. So I think if we start with acknowledging the problem. So I would say traditionally the business model for nature is more complicated than regular infrastructure. And that's not the fault of nature. That's our human invented systems. So there's a couple of issues there. You know, what is the risk profile of these investments? For example, if you're going to fund a restoration scheme, what happens if a fire goes through? You know, is that all insured or is that now gone? You know, that's very different than investing in a road, which may last for 30 years. It's a simple investment. Second one is return on investment. So, you know, if you spend, I always say to people, why is renewable energy picking up and nature is not still? So if you think about renewable energy, a government could come to us and say, we would like to borrow some money to build a solar power plant. You build the plant with the money that you borrow, you turn it on, you sell electricity to residential or commercial customers, you pay the loan back from the income generated. And once the loan's paid back, then you know, you're generating income for the government. And also that's also appeasing or pleasing voters, right? Now think of the same scenario with nature. You say, okay, we have this area that's of high biodiversity value. We want to borrow money to manage this well, etc. Where is the income generation model from that? Now it might be from tourism, but then that often goes to private stakeholders rather than the government. And otherwise it's a difficult, it's an unclear model, which especially poor or emerging countries have to source from another part of their economy. So that's a challenge. And then the last one is, what is nature finance, right? And again, we're working on taxonomies here. And if this is not well defined, then this can become a challenge. So what we're doing is dividing up into nature mainstream and nature positive. That's the idea at the moment. But some of the examples that were shared by IWMI are nature as infrastructure. And we have some colleagues from MDBs, for example, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank is an infrastructure bank. And so they look at nature as infrastructure. And so you're building in some of these MBS solutions to flooding and other things, which can then be captured in regular loans as long as the output or result is the same for the country, right? So if you're trying to prevent flooding, whether that's done by grey infrastructure or green infrastructure, at the end of the day may not make a difference. So there's one entry point, for example. The other thing I wanted to mention was in the region here, Saudi Arabia has the Saudi Green Initiative, but they also have something called the Middle East Green Initiative. Now, these will be large scale, as we understand, large scale nature-based initiatives. And so here you may get large amounts of grant financing, which will be introduced, which could then be blended with concessional lending to then have quite a large impact. And this will really mainstream some of these nature-based solutions into that. And the last point is we have something called the Lives and Livelihoods Fund, which is a combination of philanthropic grant financing with concessional lending. And so basically your money goes further at a cheaper rate. And in that case, we use that to access very vulnerable and poor communities. But potentially you could orient something like that around nature-based finance, right? Where you have similar challenges with the model and maybe that could work. And the last point is often we also do lines of finance to lend through domestic banks, for example. And this can be thematically done. So it could be green lines of finance. So you might provide volumes of money which the banks can on-lend to smallholder farmers, etc., and incentivize green activities. So you get lower interest rates or something for activities that may benefit society more broadly. So these are some ideas. We don't have all the solutions, but these are things that are being explored.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Dr. Sans.
Thank you very much, Bradley. But I want to mention that since you're from the CG family, today a blog actually Stephen and I wrote about, I mean, on the basis of today is still within the 16-day campaign on the prevention of gender-based violence, and today is also the International Human Rights Day. So we're looking at examples of where women led revolving funds in local communities, and why in some areas they were very sustainable. Even after the fund ended, they continued for water harvesting, solar panels, and so on. And it took a long time, but they used the communicating the value and using their own simple terms to convince each other. So in that particular village that I visited, they were maybe less than 100 solar panels and water harvesting. I visited later, 15 years later, and all the houses had solar panels and most of the houses had gray water. So they believe in it and they do it themselves because of their own conviction. So there are successful models. And I think, Bradley, what you mentioned was absolutely correct. The return, as long as they appreciate and they internalize the return into something meaningful, they will approach funding resources. My question to you is how to convince the banking loan officer that this is actually a valuable, relevant, viable investment to make. Thank you.
You so much. And this is also a follow-up question that I wanted to propose is that how do we make the farmers have more accessibility when it comes to these projects? I know that they're high risk. The project might not succeed after all. The project might not gain the same profits that were anticipated at the beginning. So these are all things to take into consideration when we talk about nature-based solutions loans. And these are all things that we need to consider from the point of the funders. But maybe we'll touch up on that at a later point. I do want to get to the governments before that. Maybe we'll start with Egypt, Dr. Mohammed. Alternative solutions. So if these solutions are not particularly viable, or if these solutions have certain challenges, what are some of the alternative solutions that we or you as governments can propose for the farmers on the local level to support nature-based or the development, the adoption, the dissemination of better nature-based solutions on the ground for the local farmers?
I need to say something that's related to the Egypt government. We highly support the smallholder farmers. We support it by different ways. One of them, it's how to saving the fertilizers, for example, for his plant in the recommendation dose and the economic price is very important. For the adaptation with climate, for example, I will mention that there's something is related to if you add fertilizers, it means you add salt for the soil, for example. So if you give you a good recommendation, this for your addition is very important. This me to make a balance between the nutrients itself in soil, and will be help you the farmers to enhance the productivity. Nowadays, we're thinking about another things, how to use the biofertilizers as a nature-based solution to enhance the fertilization and enhance the soil health. It's very important one. It's a supporting. We introduced this product by my institute with very cheap price. And to using this will saving about 25% of fertilizers, and this will give you a good chance to I need to say that he not paying a lot of money. This means that he have a good profit in his in the last year. It's very important. And the second one, what we thinking, how we do that soil fertility map and give him a good imaging for his soil and the soil salinity, the pH, the calcium carbonate content, and the nutrients as a micro and macronutrients, and how we can, if you have a shortage in nitrogen, for example, we have a good recommendation for him to enhance his nutrients in the soil. The third one, we have a digital application free for the farmers nowadays to help him. For example, we have a Airway application, and this is for free. Just go to Play Store and download the application and use it, create an account, and now he can calculate the amount of water that you need for his crop. It's very important. So this is very easy application and for free. And now we try to develop this application to add another application together with to how we calculate the fertilizers rate for his land, and depend on the crop and depend on the soil status. It's very important. This is we try to support the smallholder MENA by different ways.
Thank you so much. Maybe I can be the devil in this conversation and maybe push you a little bit further and ask, does this come with maybe better technology literacy for the farmers? Because how do we ensure that the farmers are, well versed enough to deal with technology, to deal with apps, to download them? Are they user friendly? How do we ensure that they're user friendly to the extent that farmers may find them reliable, usable, etc.? Is this a component that was taken into consideration in the development of the apps, or do you, once these apps go live, do you go to the farmers who are your target farmers or target maybe local communities and maybe spread awareness on how to use them? So how do you ensure that they are usable for the farmers?
Okay, I need to mention that for increasing the awareness for the farmer, we have 3 ways. The first one is field days. Usually after we finish our activity or what you're thinking about, for example, for biofertilizer and so on, we should making a field days to let the farmers see the result by himself, to be sure that how we can use it. And the second one is the farmer schools, farmer field schools. We already did this. And third one is the demonstration field. And through our project, for example, for irrigation application, we already did that with EME. And nowadays we development Airway with the FAO and EME together. And we will do in next few months that we will do going to the farmers in the field and put the application in his hand and how he can use, and we illustrate all things related to the application, and we try to make after that farmer field school to make the farmers himself to learn another farmers, to be sure that he increasing the awareness between the farmers.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Muhammad. Maybe I'll go to the UK engineer, Amira, and I do want you to kindly address the question on alternative solutions, but also let me add another layer to the question. The UK, I think, works bifocally on a lot of nature-based solutions and supporting these projects, but also you work in a lot of countries in the region, in Africa, on humanitarian assistance or, you know, just ad hoc support to farmers. How do you think that we could integrate the work that we're doing on nature-based solutions and enforcing or supporting the adoption of nature-based solutions for smallholder farmers in these countries, but also I like to use the word graduating from ad hoc humanitarian or ad hoc assistance to these farmers in contexts that are fragile, in contexts that face food security, water security, in which the UK has been very active in supporting, and kind of like taking them from the process of being recipients of aid to being resilient, adopting nature-based solutions, ensuring their livelihood and ensuring that they are resilient financially and from a livelihood systems approach. So over to you.
Thank you so much. As many layers as well. I'll do my best to answer that. But before that, maybe I would also highlight something that is embedded, I believe, in the design of Al-Muruna project, which is also, as Stephen has mentioned, human-centered designed approach, or also the way that I would like to describe it is that participatory approach, which means that the community has voice almost equally as all other stakeholders in the project. That being said, we need to not underestimate the community knowledge and the farmers' knowledge, because first of all, they might be actually adopting nature-based solutions, but they're not necessarily calling it nature-based solution. So it's not about the title or name or whatsoever. But I believe also because I've attended actually one of the workshops with different stakeholders from the community in Cairo, in Egypt, with Al-Muruna. And that honestly was, at least for me, was very impressive to see this kind of integration of having the voices of the community in the project itself. So my point is, having the farmer's voice in designing the intervention that best works for them, I think shouldn't be overlooked. And I believe that's, as I said, again, embedded in Al-Muruna design. What was your second part of the question? Sorry.
Yes. Thank you. My second part of the question was that you're working on different parallel levels. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, it will be as a donor or as a partner that funds these projects, it will be even more feasible for you as well to kind of graduate from the very expensive, very ad hoc assistance of like supporting on very, you know, like humanitarian or emergency-based aid to more sustainable nature-based solutions projects that are not only beneficial for the donor, but also on long-term sustainability based is more also beneficial for the smallholder farmers. And this is specifically maybe not only in Egypt, but across the spectrum of stability and fragility. So in Africa, in the MENA region, in emergency situations as well.
Yes, thank you. So basically, let's first differentiate between the humanitarian support or aids and also the development work. So the Foreign Development Office, where I work, is basically focusing on sustainable development. So it's not about going and like tackling crisis, but rather a sustainable way of how our different stakeholders or beneficiaries could best benefit, but also own the project or the outcome themselves. I think also in the Muruna design itself, it's at certain stage, it's gonna be wholly adopted by local stakeholders, not not the UK government anymore. And so that's in the one of the stages that we are aiming to do, and honestly, that's where we would like to support is funding projects that could be either hosted by the government later on. So I'm in my mind, I have at least 2 other projects beside Muruna that are basically designed to be in like 2 to 3 years, hosted by the local government, the local stakeholders. And so we do that all across. The last point that I would mention is related to also how much the UK also believe in funding the nature-based solutions. So we have our contribution in the Climate Investment Fund. The UK is the largest donor to that fund. And one of the pillars is actually on nature and planet. And since we have Egypt, and I come from Egypt as well, so Egypt has also got accepted in one of the projects under that. I've just seen that the Egyptian Minister of International Cooperation, Dr. René Mashat, has just had a meeting regarding this 2 days ago. And also, again, why we see this as sustainable, because that should be part of, and I've seen an integration between this program that we're funding under the CIF, but also NWAFI, which is the Egypt's platform to deliver its climate action. And we've seen also that this kind of overlap and partnership would definitely enhance the recipients to like have the ownership and like have it in a sustainable manner, if I can say so.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Maybe I'll turn to Bradley for that last question on how do we make, so we understand that there are very high risks when it comes to engaging from an MDB's perspective in projects that implement nature-based solutions on the ground, especially for smallholder farmers. But my question is, how do we make, as a smallholder farmer, as people who work with farmers, how do we make the conditions more viable or more attractive for MDBs to invest? How do we increase the viability, increase the feasibility of these projects? What are the checkboxes that need to be there, that need to be checked in order for these projects to be more likely to be supported by MDBs? And this is maybe very case specific. This is very context specific. It depends on the context, which is, of course, we're all aware of. And I think your project as well, Muruna, kind of proves that. The data that was produced by Muruna proves that there's a big component of context specificity, and what works in one context might not work in the other. But overall, what are the umbrella factors that need to be there for there to be more chances of projects getting adopted or supported by the MDBs?
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot in there to unpack, but I'll be brief. So just firstly to say, I agree with what the colleague from UK said. My PhD looked at in China, actually, where the World Bank looked at traditional practices or local innovations, then modernized those and scaled them up and had a huge impact. For example, they had something called check dams. So there was erosion coming down the gullies, and the local people would block off this erosion, and this would form a lake initially, and they would practice aquaculture in there. And then as the erosion kept coming down from this degraded landscape, eventually it would all fill up with sediment, and then you have a new fertile field there. And so you could do this, in stages down the gully. Now, with the World Bank, they came in and helped to revegetate that, so you stop the source of the erosion. But they still modernize some of these systems. So again, I think building on the innovations that people have is really critical. It's, you can't always come from the outside with, we know best and you guys should adopt this. So really support that. In terms of, for the MDBs, and I guess for any financial institution, And I'm an engineer and a scientist. I'm not an economist. But, you know, if you look at it, many financial institutions would prefer to have one transaction of $100 million than a million transactions of $100, right? And so, and you can see why this is the case, but that doesn't mean that that's necessarily right. So there's different ways that you can work around that. I think I mentioned the takaful. You know, for us, this is something that's really important. As you mentioned at the beginning, it's culturally appropriate because in many cases, people won't use other forms of conventional insurance. But at the same time, we also have to be careful because, you know, insurance requires people to provide money, you know, on a consistent basis. And then you need to ensure that when there is an event and a shock such as a drought, this affects everybody, right? So there's going to be potentially a huge payout. So how do you manage that is very, very difficult. I think a couple of things, financial access, you know, improving financial access can be improved by digital technology, I think, as a colleague from Egypt mentioned. But also, we also have to understand that there are traditional methods, you know, it might be trading of livestock or other things that are non-monetary. And also financial literacy levels may not be good. So you may end up getting sharks, you know, people that take advantage of others. And then there's a bad reputation of access to finance. And then people revert again back to their traditional ways of doing things. So I think there's a lot of, you know, local capacity building, trust building, et cetera there. Obviously partners, I think, you know, multilateral development banks have certain skill sets, but also certain limitations. And then other partners have strengths that can be leveraged as well. So yeah, I think these are some ideas. You know, there's no silver bullet or one solution. I think having bespoke solutions is good. And then also we often lend to central governments, but then there's also provincial governments, then local governments. So again, getting down to the levels of the local community. And there are ways that we try to work directly with civil society organizations and other groups, again, where we can help to improve some of these things. And completely agree on the gender component. I contributed to a report here called Her Land, which is a publication that came out. And there's a lot of good examples in there of women empowerment and women enterprises and things. I have a copy here I can just show people afterwards if they're interested.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I do want to turn to you, Doctor, for a very final 2 minutes question. What's next for Al Muruna? Because for us in the room and also for for our participants joining online, what's next? What do we expect as the next stages of the project, and what can we anticipate?
So as the beginning, Stephen described Al Muruna in its stages. Now Al Muruna Plus, which focuses on gender equitable practices, the idea is to generate evidence. So we will be engaging the next immediate step in a baseline evaluation. We need to capture the numbers, followed by the implementation. We will have a midline or an end line and a post-end line. So evidence and generating the successes and the numbers for scaling, for future scaling is going to be our top priority. So basically the idea is that the Al Muruna Plus is an addition, is not an addition, it's a scaling deep into Al Muruna. So it's not a new separate program, it's just scaling deep, but we need to capture the evidence in order to scale larger. Thank you.
Thank you so much to you, Doctor, and thank you to all our excellent speakers. This has been a very interesting conversation. We're right on the dot, and we're good? Okay, we're right on the dot. We finished our panel excellently on time. So thank you to the speakers who have kept it interesting and concise. And thank you to you who have joined us in person or our participants online who have tuned in to the conversation. And yeah, we look forward to more conversations and more discussions on Al Muruna and also on the work of our excellent partners, whether national entities or MDBs or other stakeholders and partners. And yeah, thank you. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye for now.